traded from one cruel husband to another. A Lakota chief was the third man and did not hurt her. The rope was a bad piece of work, frayed at the middle, knotted wrong, both ends tied to the wrong rings. I stood there at the post looking at it the way you look at something a man made in anger instead of sense, and I knew before I turned around what kind of a trade this was going to be. His name was Cord Pettifer, though I didn't know that then. I knew him by his boots, good boots, expensive, too new for the dust on them, and by the way he held the lead rope loosely, like it was beneath him to grip hard. A man who holds a rope like that has never actually needed to hold anything in his life. I had come into that camp to trade 2 horses, a quantity of dried meat, and a bolt of blue wool cloth that my sister's husband had brought back from the river settlement. Simple enough. I had done it before with other men at the edge of that territory. What I had not expected was what was on the other end of that rope. She was standing behind Pettifer's wagon. Not tied. He hadn't needed to tie her. She was standing still the way a woman stands when she has learned that standing still is the only thing that doesn't cost her something. I noticed her the way you notice an animal that has gone too quiet. It is not peace. It is the absence of hope that looks like peace from a distance. I finished looking at the rope and I turned to the trade. We talked horses. He had 2 mares he wanted to move and a sorrel gelding that was favoring his left front, and he thought I hadn't noticed. I let him think I hadn't noticed. I traded as if the horse were sound, and I paid less accordingly, and neither of us said the word because we both knew, and the knowing was the transaction. That is how it works in a camp at the edge of things. She moved once slightly when a horse near her stamped. I saw it from the side of my eye. The flinch was wrong, too fast, the body catching itself before the noise had even finished. That is a different kind of learning than the startling a sound makes on a person who has never been hit. I did not look at her directly. That was important. Looking directly changes the air in a place like that camp. We finished the horses and started on the wool and the dried meat. Pettifer had things he wanted too, 2 iron cooking pots, a length of rope that was better than the one hanging from that post, some lead for bullets. We went back and forth. His man, a flat-faced boy with a bad tooth he kept tonguing, stood nearby and did nothing useful. Then Pettifer said it, the way men say things they've decided already and are only now putting into the air, that he had something else to trade if I was of a mind. I didn't answer right away. I finished folding the edge of the bolt back over itself the way I had unfolded it. I set it down. He said she was his wife, bought and paid for from her first husband, who was in a bad situation and had needed to move money quickly. He said she was clean, fed, not sick, strong enough, and that she did work. He said all this the way a man reads a bill of sale he has memorized. She did not move. She was looking somewhere beyond the near ridge, somewhere far. I said what things I had left to trade, and I kept my voice the same as it had been when we were talking about horses. That is what you do. The voice is a thing you can control, and controlling it in that moment was the only dignity available to me. He named a price. I looked at the price like I was looking at the frayed rope, as a problem of sense, not a problem of feeling. I had those things. I did not need them. I traded them. I want to be honest here, because I am old now and honesty is mostly what I have. I did not know what I was going to do with her when I rode out of that camp. I knew what I was not going to do. That was settled in me before the rope changed hands. But knowing what a thing is not does not tell you what it is, and I rode most of that first afternoon with her on the second horse and no clear answer in me. Her name, I found out on the second day, was Nora. She had been born in Missouri. She had been 19 years old when her father had traded her to the first man, a farmer named Holt, who was not a bad man in the beginning and then was, the way water cuts a channel in stone, not all at once but in one direction only always. She had been with Holt for 4 years. Then the debt and Pettifer and 14 months of Pettifer, And now she was in her middle-20s on a horse she didn't know how to ride, following a man she didn't know anywhere he led. She learned his cruelty differently than she learned to ride. The riding came slowly, with effort, with visible trying. The cruelty that she had already learned to the bone, that knowledge needed no instruction. She watched me the first days the way you watch a dog you don't know, not with fear exactly. Fear at least believes in the possibility of surprise. What she had was something more like a resignation to the fact of the pattern being that men were men, and what men were was a fact about the world as fixed as weather. I let her watch. That was all I could do. Actions take time to become evidence, and she had seen enough actions that she would not believe quickly, and she was right not to believe quickly, and I respected her for it even though it made everything harder. I did not explain myself to her. An explanation from me meant nothing. Words from a man meant nothing. She had heard words. So I gave her the better blanket on the first cold night and said nothing about it. When we made camp, I cooked, and I set her portion down without ceremony and moved away to eat my own. When I picketed the horses, I showed her how, without making it a lesson, just doing it and letting her see. When the wind shifted in the night and the horses got uneasy, I was up already. And in the morning she must have noticed that I had been between her and the dark the whole night, because I saw her look at the flattened grass and then look at me and then look away without a word. None of that was for her to thank me for. I want to be clear about that. It was not a performance and it was not a gift. It was simply what the situation called for, and I am a man who tries to do what a situation calls for. My father was such a man. His father was such a man. This is not virtue. It is just how you carry yourself, or it isn't, and either way you know which kind of man you are. On the fourth night she said, into the fire, not looking at me, "I don't know where you're taking me." I said I was taking her to my camp on the Powder River, which was 2 days more riding east. She said, "And then what?" I thought about it, not performing thought but actually thinking because the question deserved thinking. Then I said, "That's yours to decide." She looked at me then. The firelight. Her face was not soft. It had the set of a face that has made itself into something that doesn't show much because showing much costs too much. I had seen that look on men after bad campaigns. I had seen it on my own face once in standing water after the winter my son died. She said, "You paid for me." I said, "I traded for you. That's different from owning you." She said nothing. She looked back at the fire. I said, "The Hung Papa have no word for owning a person. We have a word for taking. We have many words for that. They are not good words." She said, "Then what am I to you?" I thought about that too. I said, "Finally, you are a person who was in a bad place. I took you out of it. That's all it is right now." The fire went down. The horses settled. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, and I didn't try to tell. Some things you can only wait on. My camp on the Powder was not a large camp that season. Most of my band had moved further north after the summer hunts. What remained was my own family. My sister keeps the fire and her man Crow Lance and their 3 children. 2 old men who had decided to winter there, and whose decision I was not about to argue with. A widow named Bird Makes Noise whose husband had gone 3 winters ago, and who had made herself useful in about 15 ways since, and would have been useful to argue with about almost nothing either. And a young man named Flat Cloud, who was learning what he needed to learn and doing it badly and with great confidence, the way young men do. They saw her when we rode in. Nobody said anything overt. Keeps the Fire looked at me the way sisters look at brothers when they have decided to reserve judgment, but want you to know they are reserving it actively. Bird Makes Noise looked at the woman with a straight, measuring look, the kind that is actually respectful. It takes you seriously enough to measure you. The old men looked at her horse. Crow Lance said, "Another mouth." I said, "Another pair of hands." He said, "Same thing until it isn't." I gave her a place in the camp. The small lodge near the eastern edge, which had been used for storage and now had the storage redistributed. It was not much of a lodge, but it was hers, and the flap was hers to close, and she could close it. For the first week she stayed near the lodge. She came out for water. She watched. She had a stillness about her that was not rest. In the morning I noticed she would stand with her back to the lodge wall and look at the whole camp from that position, the way a person orients themselves to a space before they'll move through it comfortably. I understood that. I had done the same thing in strange places, after the war parties, before I knew the ground. On the 8th day she came to where I was working on a set of harness straps that needed new stitching, and she sat down without asking and watched me work. I did not say anything. After a while she said, "Can I?" I gave her the awl and showed her the stitch angle. She already knew a version of it. Holt had had her do harness work. She said, like an aside, not looking at me. She took the stitch up and worked it cleanly and better than I would have done it in the places where her hands were better suited than mine. After that she found work. I didn't assign it and I didn't praise it when she did it, because she was not a child learning and I was not her father, and she would have known the difference between being truly seen and being managed. Bird Makes Noise worked alongside her sometimes. I don't know what they said to each other. I know that once I heard Bird Makes Noise laugh, a real laugh, short and unexpected, and then heard a sound that might have been Nora laughing too, and I put my attention back on what I was doing and let that be. Keeps the Fire said to me, one evening when we were alone by the horses, "She is not what I thought." I said, "What did you think?" She said, "I thought she would be broken." I said, "She's not broken." Keeps the Fire looked at me and looked at the horses and said, "No, she's been in a fire and come out the other side. That's different." The trouble came in the 2nd month. 3 men. I had known 2 of them before, brothers named Vaich, from a settlement 2 days east, hard men who traded in things that were easier to trade when there were no witnesses and no law nearby. The 3rd man I didn't know. He was wearing a hat that was too big for him, which is a detail that stays with me because it was the kind of wrong detail you notice when everything else is about to go wrong. They came into camp mid-morning, when Crow Lance was away with Flat Cloud working the far pasture. They came in slow, the way men come in slow when they've decided in advance to seem reasonable. The big Vaich, whose name was Cal, said they were looking for a woman, and described Nora in enough detail that he had clearly talked to Pettifer. He said she was property. He said the man she belonged to wanted her back and had sent them to collect her, and that they didn't want any trouble over it. I was standing by the fire. I was not holding anything. That was a choice I had made the moment I saw them come through the tree line, the way a decision about posture is actually a decision about power. A man with empty hands is making a statement about how much he needs what he is holding. I said, "She is not here to be collected." Cal said, "The man has a paper on her. A proper bill of sale, signed and witnessed." I said, "I know about the paper. I was there when it was written." He said, "Then you know she belongs to him." I said, "The paper says what it says. She is not here to be collected." There was a quiet then, the kind of quiet that is full of things. I was aware of Keeps the Fire behind me and slightly left, and of Bird Makes Noise, who had moved somewhere out of the direct line of sight the way a sensible woman moves in a situation like that. I was aware of where the 2 old men were sitting, though they were well back and would not be in any of it. The 3rd man with the too big hat shifted his weight. That was the one I was watching most carefully. Cal said, "There's 3 of us and 1 of you, Chief." I said, "That's a kind of arithmetic." "There's another kind." He said, "What was the other kind?" I said, "The kind where you think about how this ends." There's a quality a man has when he is not afraid and when the not afraid is genuine. I have been told I have this quality. I don't experience it as a quality. I experience it as knowing what I'm willing to do and not being troubled by knowing it. Some men are troubled by it. You can see the trouble arrive in them like weather. I saw it arrive in the man with the too big hat. He said to Cal something about it not being worth it. Cal was working up to an answer that went the other direction, because Cal was that kind of man, when Nora came out of the small lodge. She had heard, or she had seen from the flap opening. She walked to where I was standing, not behind me but beside me, and she looked at Cal Veitch with a look I hadn't seen on her face before. It was not a frightened look. It was not even a particularly angry look. It was the look of a person who has decided something. She said to Cal, "I'm not going back." Cal said that wasn't her decision to make. She said, "I'm making it anyway." He looked at me. I looked at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to say anything. Nora had said what there was to say, and I was standing where I was standing, and there was nothing else that needed to be added. The third man with the hat said again, "It's not worth it." This time Cal heard him. They left. They didn't leave clean. There was more talk, more pointing, more statements about what was going to happen, all of which were statements about what was not going to happen, because statements about what will happen are a way of moving from a place without admitting you're moving from it. I let them have it. A man can be generous about words when he's won the part that matters. Flat Cloud came back an hour later and was deeply grieved to have missed it. That night was cold, a hard cold, the kind that comes in off the northern plains like a hand pushing flat against everything. The fire was big, but the dark at the edges of it was bigger. She came and sat near me at the fire, not across from me, which is how she had sat before, beside me. She said after a while, "I've never done that before." I said, "Done what?" She said no to a man who thought he owned me. I didn't say anything. The fire worked at the wood. She said, "I thought I'd be more afraid." I said, "You were standing. That's what matters." She said, "You were standing there first." I said, "You can stand beside a person and still be standing yourself." She looked at the fire. I looked at the fire. There was the sound of wind above the camp, up in the pines, that particular sound like something moving through that isn't the wind itself but is moved by it. She said, "Why did you trade for me?" I said, "Because you were there and the situation called for it." She said, "That's not really an answer." I thought about it. I said, "No, it's not the whole answer." She waited. She was good at waiting. I had noticed that about her. She had the patience of someone who has learned that pushing for things usually makes them worse. It was not a comfortable patience. It was an earned patience. There's a difference. I said, "When I was a young man, I came on a horse that had been ridden badly, left in a bad place, left tied in a way that was wrong and would have hurt it. I didn't know whose horse it was. I took it. I did what needed to be done for it, and then when it was right I found who it belonged to and returned it, and the man who owned it was not a good man and the horse was better off somewhere else, and I said so, and the man said the same things that Pettifer said, and I kept the horse." She said, "Am I the horse in this?" I said, "No. A horse can't choose to leave or stay." She looked at me. The firelight. Her face had changed from when I had first seen it. Behind that wagon, that stillness that was the absence of hope. It was not soft now. It was still the face that had been through things and would not pretend otherwise. But there was something in it that had come back in. Some quality that is in a person when they have started to believe that tomorrow might be different from yesterday. I said, "You can go when you want. I can send you to the river settlement with Crow Lance when he goes in the spring, or further, whatever you need, wherever you want to go." She said, "What if I don't want to go?" I said, "Then you don't go." She said, "Is that an invitation?" I said I didn't know what it was. I said I was probably not easy to be around, that I was a man of habits that were set a long time ago, and that I had been a long time without making room for another person in the daily business of my life, and that I was past 50 and my knees were not what they were, and I was not offering anything I couldn't name clearly and honestly. I said all of that to the fire, not to her, because it was easier to say it to the fire. She listened to all of it, Then she said Holt was charming, Pettifer was confident, neither of them was honest. I didn't say anything. She said, I think I've had enough of charming and confident. The wind moved through the pines again. One of the horses blew. The cold pressed in from all sides and the fire held it off. She put her hand on my arm. Not dramatically, not as a gesture with a meaning attached that you had to interpret. Just her hand on my arm, the way you put your hand on something solid to know it is there. I let her hand be there. I did not make anything of it. It was enough. Winter came down hard that year. The way it comes in that country, not a gradual thing but a decision the land makes overnight, and then you are in it. There is a lot of winter in that country. There is a lot of time to know a person in a winter. I learned that she had a habit of waking before first light and sitting with her hands around a cup of water or broth, not drinking it, just holding the warmth. I learned that she was afraid of very little that I could name, but that certain sounds, a door catching on its frame, a raised voice from outside camp, made something happen in her body that was not something she could stop. The way a horse that has been treated badly will always step sideways at certain sounds no matter how calm it is otherwise. I learned that she was good at being still and good at moving fast when it was needed, and that she could read the sky for weather better than most men I had known, a skill she said she'd learned from the years watching the horizon on the flat Missouri land, watching it for what was coming, getting ready. She learned me too. I know this because she stopped doing things that would have startled me, the way you learn the particular distances a person needs. She learned when I needed to be left alone with a thing, and when being left alone with a thing had gone on long enough. She learned which of my moods were working moods and which were the ones that came from a place that had no work at the bottom of it. She didn't try to talk me out of any of them. She just stayed near enough that I knew she was there, which was, I found, what I needed. One afternoon in the deep middle of winter, I was sitting working on a bow that needed its horn tips resecured, and she sat down across from me and she said, I want to learn that. I looked at her. She said, whatever you're doing, I want to know how to do it. So I showed her, not because she needed to know, not because it was useful to have another person who could do it, but because she asked, and the asking was honest, and when someone asks you an honest thing, the honest response is to answer it. She had good hands, careful, strong, exact. She learned the pressure needed for the rawhide wrapping without me having to tell her twice. She learned what tight enough looks like versus too tight by feel, not by instruction. We worked through the afternoon that way, side by side in the lodge, with the sound of the wind outside and the small contained sounds of work inside, and it was the best afternoon I can remember from that winter. I should say something about what happened to Cal Vach. He came back in the early spring alone, and he did not come to the camp. He waited on the East Trail for Crow Lance and Flat Cloud, who were going to the settlement, and he sent a message back with them about the paper and about his intentions and about the law, which he mentioned several times as though the law were a person who would come if called and whom I would be afraid of. I sent back a message that I had noted his concerns. He did not come again. I have been told since, by men who move between the settlements and the open land, that Pettifer left that territory entirely and went somewhere south, which does not surprise me. Men like Pettifer move when the thing they are holding becomes too much trouble to hold. They go looking for an easier place to hold things. What I want to say about that spring, I have been working toward this the way you work toward a thing that matters, setting other things down first. The camp had moved with the warmth, up along the North Fork, where the grass was coming in good and the horses were happy in a way horses are happy when they have room and good water. It was early enough in the season that the evenings were still cold, but the middle of the day had that quality of light that is specific to that country in the spring. A low, long, gold light that comes in at an angle and makes everything it touches look more itself. She came and found me where I was sitting above the camp on the slope of the cutbank, where I had a view of the whole valley. I went there sometimes to think. She had known for some time that I went there for that, and until that evening she had always let me have it alone. She sat down beside me, not behind me, not across from me, beside me. We looked at the valley. The horses were moving below in the good grass. The smoke from the camp fires was going straight up in the still air, which is a thing that makes a man feel the world is in good order, smoke going straight up. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the river settlement, about spring." I said, "What did you think?" She said, "I thought about going. I thought about it seriously because I thought I should think about it seriously. What I would do, where I would go, what a life would look like that was entirely my own, that I'd made myself from the ground up." I waited. She said, and I realized I was already in that life, that I'd made it here in this camp over this winter, that the thing I was imagining having somewhere else, a place where I was known, and where knowing me was a good thing, where I did real work and it mattered, where I wasn't waiting to find out what kind of man I was dealing with, I have that here. She turned and looked at me. I was looking at the valley. She said, "I have you here." I looked at her then. She looked at me the way a person looks at someone they have decided about, not in a moment but over time, which is the only way a decision like that means anything. There was no performance in it. There was no asking for something in return. She had thought it through, and she was telling me what she had found at the end of the thinking. I said, "I'm not an easy man." She said, "I know that." I said, "I have habits that are set." She said, "I know. I've been watching them all winter." I said, "I don't have much to give that I can name." She put her hand on the side of my face, just her palm on the side of my face, the way you lay your hand on something to tell it that you see it. I stayed very still. I had been still in a lot of hard situations in my life, but that was the most still I can remember being. She said, "You kept me safe, when no one had ever kept me safe before, when I didn't know that was something that was possible for me. You did that without asking anything for it." I said, "I didn't do it for you to owe me." She said, "I know you didn't, that's why I'm here." The valley was gold in the last light. The horses were still. The smoke was still going straight up. I put my hand over hers, where it was against my face. Not to hold it there, she could have taken it away whenever she chose. Just to know it was there. Just to know this was real, and I was in it. And I was a man a woman had decided to see clearly and choose freely, which is the thing I had stopped believing would happen for me a long time before that evening on that cutbank with the good light in the valley below. That was a long time ago. Long enough that the valley has changed. The settlement came, and another settlement after it, and the world that was open is now a world with edges on it. I am old now, the knees are worse. The things I can do in a day are fewer than they were. She is still here. That is what I wanted to say. All of it has been pointing toward that. She is still here, and she chose to stay every day of every year of the time between that evening and this one, with the full use of her will and her mind, knowing me as well as anyone has ever known me, which is better than I knew myself for a good part of my life. She came in this morning when I was sitting here thinking about how to tell this, and she set a cup of broth down beside me, and she put her hand briefly on my shoulder, and she said something quiet and went back to work. She has things to do. She has always had things to do. She is a person who makes use of herself. I sat for a while after she left with my hand on the cup she had set down, feeling the warmth of it. I don't have much more to say than that. A man who spent a long time being invisible, being useful but not seen, competent but alone, capable of things no one needed him to be capable of anymore. And then a woman looked at him straight and chose him, eyes open, freely, and stayed. The cup is warm in my hands. That's enough. That's more than enough.